And I'm the Robert Francis Ames, Director of the Lemon Project, A Journey of Reconciliation. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Day 5 and our second keynote of the Lemon Project Symposium. Our theme this year is 4 Centuries of Black Women in America, Freedom, Activism, and Justice for All. Before we begin, I'd like to share the following statements with you. William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherenhaka, Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Potomac, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members, past and present. Also, the Lemon Project stands with the rest of William and Mary in solidarity with our Asian, Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern, and Southwest Asian colleagues and students to say that anti-Asian hate is unacceptable and has no place at William and Mary. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you our second keynote of the week, Dr. Catherine Meeks. Dr. Meeks is the founding executive director of the Absalom Jones Episcopal Center for Racial Healing, as well as the retired Clara Carter Acree Distinguished Professor of Sociocultural Studies and Sociology from Wesleyan College. Catherine is an author who has published 7 books, including her most recently co-authored book, Passionate for Justice, Ida B. Wells, A Prophet for Our Times, which was released in September 2019, and her edited book, Living into God's Dream, Dismantling Racism in America, which focuses on racial healing and reconciliation, which was published in 2016. She is a regular contributor to Hospitality, which is published monthly by the Open Door community. She is involved with prison work and faithfully visits a person who was formerly on death row. She is committed to working for the abolition of the death penalty, writing, and helping to create spaces where transformation and rebirth can occur. It is my pleasure to present to you Dr. Catherine Meeks.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. And it is such a delight to be here. And thank you so much for your persistence in trying to get me to be able to participate in this very worthy cause of the Lemon Project. And I'm grateful to all of the folks engaged in this project for the work you've done. And I want to just take a second to say how much it warms my heart to hear that you pay tribute to the Native peoples upon whose land you sit, and to our Asian and Pacific Islander sisters and brothers, because we sometimes are careless in making those acknowledgements when we get focused in one particular way and we can't get ourselves into a more global place. And so I'm so grateful. It just absolutely warms my heart. Thank you, all of you. It is a great delight to be here and to talk about African-American women, one of my favorite topics. And tonight I want to talk about some particular aspects of African-American women's journeys that makes me especially happy. And I'm going to frame my remarks with a few quotes. And the first one is from Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison says that she had nothing to fall back on, that is African-American women, not maleness, not whiteness, not ladyhood, not anything. And out of the profound desolation of her reality, she may very well have invented herself. And that the imagery in those words the first time I read them, I nearly fell out of my chair. It was such a powerful set of images for me, and just summed up the journey that I had watched so many people follow and followed myself. And I just am so struck by the absolute truth of how that describes the journey of so many African American women. And I, excuse me, think that that is part of the reason why I chose this title for this talk tonight, because of how much these words resonate and how much truth I think they embody. The other person that I want to use in this whole framing piece is Ntozake Shange, who wrote For Colored Girls Who've Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. And I want to just read this little piece from her. Somebody, anybody, sing a Black girl's song, bring her out to know herself and to know you, but sing her rhythms, caring struggles, hard times, sing her song of life. She's been dead so long, closed in silence so long, she doesn't know the sound of her own voice, her infinite beauty. She's half notes scattered without rhythm, no tune. Sing her sighs, sing the song of her possibilities, sing a righteous gospel. Let her be born, and handled warmly. And so many women followed that pattern of having to ask, as Sojourner Truth did, ain't I a woman? So many African American women have had to ask that question because there's been a bit of confusion sometimes in the culture about the African American woman and how she should be seen. I'm just so struck by the Zora Neale Hurston's understanding of the experience of being a Black woman when she had her wonderful character in Nanny Crawford in Their Eyes Were Watching God, who's the grandmother of Janie. And if you've not read that book, let me please beg you now to, before too long, to have the experience of reading Their Eyes Were Watching God, because it is just an amazingly wonderful story. But Nanny is talking to Janie about the status of Black women. And she says, you know, the Black woman, she uses language different from this, so I'm kind of paraphrasing it. The Black woman is the mule of the world. Everybody casts their burden on her. You give the burden, is the white man gives the burden to the white woman, and she gives it to the Black man, and the Black man, they all throw the burden down and expect the Black woman to pick it up. So she's the mule of the world. And that kind of characterization of muleness is some of what has fueled the notion of Black women as those people who can kind of hold up under anything, bear all things, hope all things, be all things, because that's what you kind of think about mules. You know, mules are also, I think they're like a cross between a donkey and a horse or something. So there's some confusion about their gender a little bit, and Black women have been characterized in many ways that were not favorable characterizations for us because of this ambivalence of sometimes just outright hatred of who we were and how we are and how we can stand in the world. And so between Morrison and Shange and Hurston, we get this image of a group of people that have had to figure out then what's going to be my answer to the kinds of characterizations that have been being made about me. And I like to talk about folks that live on the margin and find their ways back from the margin. You know, I think that in this country, we're a little bit too enamored with celebrity. I think it's wonderful for anybody to succeed anytime, anywhere. I salute that. I'm proud of people succeeding, but I do think that the marginalized teach us something, and it's something that we need to pay more attention to. And there's been, following the Civil War, African-American women were mostly able to find employment as domestic workers, and they were making an average of $4 to $8 a month for their work. So in the summer of 1881, There were 20 African-American women who were washerwomen in Atlanta who decided they'd had enough and they were going to do something about the sorry wages they were getting. Now you have to think about this. This is 1881, and these are Black women who are taking it up on themselves to exercise their sense of agency. These folks that are considered the mules of the world and the people that nobody's going to sing a song about had some sense about themselves that I find to be encouraging and uplifting every time I think about it. They decided that they needed more than 20 of them to do this. So they went out and started recruiting people. And they had this organization called the Washing Society. And they recruited 3,000 women and were able, 3,000 washerwomen, and they were able to get those women to agree that they were going to charge $1 per pound for everything that they washed, and that they didn't get that money, they weren't going to wash clothes. So they went on strike. You can imagine how effective that was, because white folks didn't want to wash their clothes, and these women were washing their clothes. And so they ended up being successful, and in the city of Atlanta, which should be completely ashamed of itself, even in the 1800s, did everything it could to thwart them. They visited their homes, tried to intimidate people. They put fines against some of them. You know, they did all the things that the system does when it's trying to keep people from declaring themselves as folks who deserve to be liberated. And these women persisted and were able to change the pathway that had been carved out for them, because they had this understanding that it was up to them. There wasn't going to be anybody who was, as Sojourner Truth says, you know, helping her over ditches and worrying about her ladyhood, because Black women were not even being seen as ladies. And so if they had this sense and they rose to that occasion. And then historically, we have not done a good job of characterizing the involvement that African-American women had in the suffragist movement. And we stood up for ourselves, for our rights as women, and were quite involved and quite activistic in that work. And I'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow with Ida B. Wells, who was one of the major people who played a role in the suffragist movement. But I think that there's because the historical record is not as up to speed as it should be, there's a misunderstanding about whether or not African-American women ever really got into understanding women's rights as well as the rights of women and men in terms of the rights for Black people. Because I recall in the 60s, as a young activist in college, listening to particularly the young men who just thought for sure that if women were concerned about women's rights, it was because white women had somehow gotten them off on the wrong track, because they were supposed to just be concerned about the rights of Black people as a whole, while the young men were being pretty chauvinist, and they needed to wake up a little bit to the fact that everybody had to be liberated, and that included them and us who were females. And we had a historical record upon which to be standing when we were making that proclamation that we have a right to fight, both for ourselves as women, and then for our people, our brothers and our sons and our nephews. So I think it's really important to keep this in mind as we think about Black women carving out a sense of how to walk through the world and how to stand. The Negro women's clubs talk about lifting as we climb. So we don't go by ourselves. We go with the understanding that it's really our responsibility to take the community with us. People talk about that when we make a space that we can enter into, we will bring others into that space with us. And that is such a wonderful way to be looking at the world and understanding yourself as a part of a community where you had to work hard to be defined as the wonderful person that you happen to be. So the washerwomen striking show us something about ingenuity and creativity and imagination and a sense of self that we don't always spend a lot of time being able to understand how we can account for it. And I want to talk in a minute about one particular washerwoman, a woman who I had the amazing pleasure of actually spending some time with. I want to talk about her a little bit. And then I want to talk in more general terms about what some of the pieces of this puzzle are that makes these women be who they were, and the legacy that they have left for all of us who have the good sense to think about them and to pay attention to what they did for us. So the woman that I want to talk about her name is Osceola Mccarty, and I have asked Sarah to put up a picture of her so you can see. This is the bronze tribute that is at the University of Southern Mississippi campus for her. And the empty chair sitting there is there to represent how much she always welcomed people in her great capacity for hospitality. And so when they made this to put this statue here, they put the empty chair as a symbol, which was a very good thing for them to do. And then I want to see Sarah, the picture of her. And then I'm gonna come, and here she is with her clothes on the clothesline and her Bible in her hand. So I want to talk some about who she is, but you can see from just looking at her, a great sense of self, a great sense of agency, a great sense of, I'm here, the world needs to pay attention to me. And she would never use those words to talk about herself, I could guarantee you, but it's absolutely the case. So thank you, Sarah. So Osceola Mccarty was born in 1908. She was actually the result of her mother being raped while coming in rural Mississippi one time when her mama was returning home from attending to a sick relative. And I'm guessing she was walking and was attacked and assaulted. And, but I always called her Miss Mccarty because when I got a chance to go see her, she was like, I think close to 90 years old. And I was a professor in college and felt like a little child talking to her, actually. So it was Miss Mccarty, and yes, ma'am, for sure. You know, so she always was very helpful, even as a little girl. And then her mother passed away, and her grandmother and her aunt had to raise her. And she had to quit school when she was in the 6th grade to help take care of her sick aunt. And she did. She left school to come to help take care of her and never went back to school again. She says that that work is good for your life. And she found that it was that beauty could be found in doing the work that she was doing, which was washing clothes. And she had this great attitude about it. Let me just read to you what she says about her day's work. I would go outside and start a fire under my wash pot. Then I would soak, wash, and boil a bundle of clothes. Then I would rub them, wrench, W-R-E-N-C-H. Rub them again, starch them, and hang them on the line. After I had all of the clean clothes on the line, I would start on the next batch. I'd wash all day, and in the evening, I'd iron until 11 o'clock. The bright fire, wrenching the wet clothes, the clean cloth, the white shirts shining on the line really made me happy. Somebody describes her as having an extraordinary work ethic, and I would like to get that person and shake them, because this is so much beyond a work ethic. You know, this is not being able to see who this person is, because here's this illiterate African-American woman who works like a mule, and you think it's just about work. It's about work. It's about fulfillment. It's about being an artist. It's about naming herself and naming who she is, and paying attention to what comes from from being engaged in this whole process. I mean, I just think, you know, when I read that, I thought, yeah, that's right. You don't get it. You don't get it, you know, because if you get it, you know, you're not talking about just a work ethic. Yes, you did have a good work ethic, but it was so much beyond that. It's so much beyond just wanting to work hard. And I'll talk about the artistry again in a minute. McCarty says that hard work gives your life meaning. Everyone needs to work, and it's something to have something to feel good about. Every job can be done well, and every day has its satisfactions. If you want to feel proud of yourself, you've got to do things to be proud of. So we're talking, see, I think sometimes when we get lost in this is what constitutes greatness or great achievement, we get lost in what is the energy, what are the energetic systems that help to make people into who they need to become. And whether you find that energy being expressed by some woman who dropped out of 6th grade who washes clothes, or somebody who has, you know, who is somebody who can read and write when they're 3 years old, regardless of where you find the energy, it's the same energy of creativity and imagination and a sense of self that is something to be celebrated and to be joyous about. And so here she is telling us about a way to live life. You know, there are people who have jobs that were far easier than the job she was doing and never had the kind of joy and peacefulness and satisfaction with being a human being on the earth that she had. When I discovered her, I couldn't wait to go see her. And so I went with my kids over to Hattiesburg, Mississippi to see her. And it was so funny because my son, who was young, said, "Mama, we need to take Miss McCarty home with us. We don't need to leave her here by herself," because she was old and a little feeble then, you know. And I just loved having this little boy who had that kind of sense of concern and compassion for someone. Of course, we couldn't take her home with us, and she would not have wanted to come home with us. But she was so gracious to us and just so inviting, and it was just absolutely wonderful to be with her. The reason why I knew about her was because some of you may know this already, she saved her money. She always put her money in the bank, but she never took any of it out. And by the time she retired, she had almost $300,000, which is hard. I mean, that wouldn't be me, but she had almost $300,000. And she decided, because she never got an education, that she wanted to do something to help young people who couldn't go to college. So she gave half of her money to the University of Southern Mississippi for scholarships to go and get something she never got. You know, Alice Walker talks about Black women with, you know, the ham-fisted Black woman that's out here fighting for the kids to get school books and paper and pens and have a way to get an education that they never got. But they know how important it was, and they were willing to walk over hot coals to get access to these things for their kids. And here's Miss McCarty, who didn't have any kids, didn't get to go to school herself, saved all this money and decided to give this money to help young people have a chance to get an education. Isn't that just amazing? And doesn't that just say something about somebody who wasn't sitting around waiting on Maleness and Whiteness and Ladyhood to become a person, but who was listening to her own heart to see what is the pathway that I need to be on. And I mean, it's just so exciting to me to think about her. And I'm so humbled that I had a chance to even meet her and spend time with her. And to think about her in a larger sense, you know, not to be so quick to confine her to, well, she was a washerwoman and she's an exception. Of course, most washerwomen didn't save $300,000. We know that. Most washerwomen didn't get to be have a statue put, a bronze statue put for them on a university campus. Of course not. But the same kind of agency and ingenuity and even satisfaction for doing their work. There's so many of those stories. There's so many of them who would tell the same story if they'd had the chance. But let me say this too. The other thing that they would tell is how many folks they sent to school and how many people they got on, put on their path to success with those little dribbles of money that they got paid for being washerwomen. So there's so many people who have businesses and who have stories of success. And the reason why they ever got on that path in the first place was because they had a washerwoman in their family who was washing clothes and saving her pennies and making sure to, when they needed to buy some land or they needed to get started in their business, she had the money because she'd been saving it. And so I've always been just so fascinated by this whole genre of African-American women and have them in my own family as well. And so I know a little bit about, it's hard work. This is not about a glorification of being a washerwoman. This is about understanding who the washerwoman was and the contributions that got made by them, and to think about that energy that they embodied and the legacy of it. And what does that mean for us? So one of the things you should have noticed when you saw Miss McCarty's picture is that both times she had a Bible in her lap. And she talked about her Bible when her Bible was so important to her. And, she dropped out of school in the 6th grade, but she somehow managed to read enough for the Bible to be something that really meant something to her. And so, but it's even more than just having the Bible and holding on to it. It's the faith. It's the faith. It's the understanding of somebody bigger than you is out there and looking after you. And sometimes we get so confused about what does all that mean? If you're struggling and if life is hard, then who are you to be walking around having faith? Because why isn't God treating you better? And a whole bunch of stuff that's got nothing to do with anything, because you're not living in that person's heart and you don't know what's going on with them. And you don't know what the connections are that they have to the spirit and God and faith and all those things. Miss McCarty would tell you over and over and over that her faith was a big factor in her being who she was, in her seeing life the way she did, in her generosity of spirit, generosity that's so good until when a statue is made of her, there has to be an empty chair sitting beside her to represent her commitment to hospitality. We could use a little bit of that spirit right now in the United States of America. We could use a little bit of a spirit of welcoming to anybody. We were like, she didn't know me from Adam's house cat, as people would say. I don't think Adam actually had a cat, but I love the phrase anyway. And yet it was like she was our family. She treated us like we were her family. And so to have that generosity of heart and spirit and welcome people to the extent that everybody knows this, and when they make the statue of you, they know in order for it to be really true, they have to put an empty chair beside you. How many of us would have that happen to us? That we would have a reputation of being such generous people until people would want to make sure that we were depicted in that way. I think that having that kind of generosity of heart really says a whole lot about the integrity of the person that we're talking about. So you know that nobody's going to be walking around trying to see how to look after you. Nobody is going to be holding you up. Nobody's going to be singing your song. Who's going to sing a Black girl song is what Shenge is saying to us. Who's going to do it? Where's somebody talking about, let's go see what we can do for Miss McCarty? No. Or the other washerwomen or other women, African-American women who were doing even other kinds of jobs. And even if African-American women managed to have power and status, they still were not exempt from the attempt to keep them in their place, to keep them marginalized, because you've got this place that's been assigned for you, and it's not at the top of the food chain, you understand. So don't come acting like you think it is, because then we have to tell you to get back in your place. That was the message of the culture, no matter who you were. And if you were a washerwoman, it was not only, you barely had a place, and yet these women are saying, we have a place because we made a place for ourselves. We are making a place for ourselves. You did not intend for us to have a place. Culture, white supremacy system, paternalism, whatever, all of those things that mitigated against liberation. You didn't mean for us to have a place, but we had something else in mind. We had freedom on our minds. The South Africans had this lovely song that they sang during some of the era of apartheid, and it was it says that when you strike a woman, you have struck a rock. When you strike a woman, you have struck a rock. Think about it. And I love the imagery. I mean, I am just so inspired by this kind of not being moved by every wind that comes blowing along. The poet Rilke says that people find themselves wanting to order their lives around the easy, and not only the easy, but the easiest of the easy. But the real task is to be willing to hold to the difficult. And so that's what we're talking about, holding to the difficult and getting to the core of yourself, understanding you have a core that other people don't get to define for you. And part of what helps you to do that is to be willing to be in touch with creativity, with the energy of creativity, because, you know, the group that does Sweet Honey in the Rock, they talk about how making music and creating makes space. It clears out the air. So when you sit down, I don't know how many of you are in touch with your artist part, because we get so confused about what is an artist. If you can't paint a Rembrandt, if you can't paint like Rembrandt, then you're not an artist. Well, I'm here to tell you, you can be an artist with just how you cook cornbread, you know. You can be an artist in so many different ways. So getting in touch with that inner energy that pushes you to see beyond the suffering or the hardship or the denigration, it's maybe what made people in concentration camps able to paint flowers on the walls of the concentration camps before they were taken to the gas chamber. That may be what propels people. It's probably what helped people to survive slavery and still be people who could create and imagine and stand up and demand to be treated as human beings in the world. You know, it's a bit of a mystery. I mean, we can talk about it, we can say what we know, and then when we get done, we still know we don't know it all. We've said as much as we know, and then we have to live with some of it with gift and mystery, and we just have to figure it out. African-American women were artists and are artists and will continue to be artists, creating, making a way out of no way in so many different arenas. And warrior women who were ready to fight for themselves and for those they loved. And I don't mean go out with a gun and shoot somebody. I mean to fight the powers that be that wanted to render them and their people that they loved as useless and to marginalize and to say, here's your little space, stay in it. They were ready to stand up against that. I just love having that be a part of the legacy that I get to think about for myself and for every African-American woman and anybody else who's got the good sense to touch into that energy, that kind of creative, I'm not gonna let these other people define me, structures define me. I'm not gonna be defined by things that are trying to push me in the ground because I wasn't sent here to be put in the ground. I mean, that is such an amazing affirmation. And here's Miss McCarty in Mississippi, living her whole life proclaiming herself as a worthy human being. Here she is, proclaiming herself and washing these clothes. As a matter of fact, one of the white guys that she washed clothes for 3 years, was more than 3 years now because she's been dead a long time. He had these shirts she washed 3 years before that he wouldn't wear because he said they were so beautiful and they smell so good. And he just wasn't going to wear them because she wasn't washing clothes anymore. So he knew if he wore them, he was going to have to take them to the laundry, and they weren't going to be the same anymore. So he just had them in his closet. That's a pretty interesting response. Somebody just decided to retire their shirts when the washerwoman retired because he didn't want to have to live with shirts that she had not washed. I think that's kind of funny. She would probably really get a laugh out of it. So the last thing I want to talk about a little bit here before we get open up for questions and so we can have a conversation together is this whole notion of will and courage. You know, in order to do something, there has to be something that pushes you forward. And when I look at the current moment that we find ourselves in, I want to hold up these women, that these washerwomen and these African-American women in general, as people who somehow managed to get the message that you can turn your face, your intention, in a direction that you can travel in, and that you'll meet something on the road, an energy that supports you and helps you and keeps you going. But you've got to be able to have the notion in the first place. And that's something about will, the intention, the determination to get up from where you are and not to let somebody else define the space you can sit in. My father used to say something that I never understood as a little kid, that he could cover the ground he stood on. And I think covering the ground you stand on means standing up and proclaiming that you're worthy to have the ground to stand on. And these women found that. And then once you get that, you've got to have some courage to keep on going down the road. It takes courage to live well, to live creatively, imaginatively. It takes courage to become who you were put on the earth to be. The journey from birth to death is not always a picnic. And even people, we think money is the solution to everything, and money is great, and I'll take any that anybody's got to give me, but money is a long ways from being adequate to take care of everything that needs to be taken care of. And so, Dr. King says that you really have to find out what your integrity is about. And if you're in your 30s and you keep making decisions that run over your integrity, that you might live, if you're in your 30s and you keep hiding and being a coward, basically, and not saying yes to the calls on you to stand up and be counted and to count yourself as worthy, that even if you live to be 80 or 90, that it is a belated announcement of an earlier death. A belated announcement of an earlier death if you don't say yes to that driving force inside of yourself. So as we sit here in the 21st century, as we think about the journey, the 400 years of African Americans being in this country brought initially, at least some, as slaves, and then all of the things that happened after that. And as we think about the Europeans coming even earlier and the ways in which the Native people were treated, we know that there was always an intention to keep people of color from being able to follow the pathway to wholeness and completeness as God meant for them to have when put on this earth. And so part of the challenge for people of color is to say no to that And these folks that I've been talking about tonight said no in the loudest ways they knew how to say it. And they didn't always speak it. They lived it. They stood up. They said no at the core of themselves to everything that was trying to denigrate and destroy them and the people they loved. So we have this amazing legacy of innovative, creative, warrior woman energy. And we stand on those shoulders. We stand on those shoulders. All of us actually stand on those shoulders. And then we have to decide, what are we going to do? Because we have these amazing, strong shoulders to stand on. What kind of shoulders are we going to be? What kind of shoulders are we going to offer to those who are looking for shoulders? Who will we be? I just think that we don't have any excuses. I have got, pictures of my mother and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Ida B. Wells and Fannie Lou Hamer and Mary McLeod Bethune all over everywhere, because I want them looking at me every day saying, girl, watch out for your shoulders. Watch out. Make sure you keep your shoulders ready, because that's the legacy that you're living into. That is how you say thank you to us for what we did, by letting yourself be a great bearer of those that are around you. I mean, I need to stop right now because I'll just keep on talking and nobody else will get to ask a question. But you can tell that I love thinking about these women. I love thinking about folks that have struggled up from the bottom and from the margins to show us a way to being more human and to being more clearly who we were put on the earth to be. And I hope that you find some inspiration in hearing about these people, and then maybe you'll go and look some of them up. And if you have not read Their Eyes Were Watching God, I'll say it one more time, make sure you find yourself a way to do it, because you're in for a big treat. So why don't I stop right there, Dr. Allen and Sarah? And let's see if people have any questions or anything for the next little while we have together.
Well, I want to say, if you insist upon stopping, we can stop here, but I can listen to you a couple more hours. So
thank you.
If you haven't inspired anyone else, you have inspired me, but you always do. And I thank you so much for what you've shared with us and for being here. We do have some questions, so I'll stop talking and I will ask you. Let's see, this one, you mentioned the washerwoman's union in the 1880s. Was this kind of labor resistance common at that time in other professions as well?
Not that I know of, but then I'm not a historian about those things, so I don't want to be too definitive in my answer, but I don't know about any other kinds of gatherings like that. It may have been that they were actually starting this when they did this strike. I don't know, but I don't know about say, I know they weren't farmers. The farmers were at the mercy of, particularly sharecroppers were at the mercy of the people who own the land. So no, I don't think when the farmers tried to start such a thing in Arkansas, where I grew up, many of them were actually massacred for trying to start something. So it wasn't common, because you could get killed if you were trying to organize. So, but I don't want to make a big definitive statement because I haven't looked into that too deeply.
Okay. Let's see. I love that image of you surrounded by your own communion of saints. Can you talk a bit more about how remembering these ancestors / foremothers gives us strength for our journeys today?
Well, for one thing, it makes you shut your mouth up when you want to start grumbling. Because, when I think about Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, even my own mother, who I'll talk some about tomorrow, my life is so good compared to theirs. You know, I sit here with you all being willing to come and listen to me talk on a Friday night. They would never have been able to imagine that somebody would have done that. You know, at least some of them wouldn't have. Sojourner Truth did do a good bit of talking, so she would have been able, perhaps. But every day I have to look at myself and say, most of the time, nothing is going to happen to you that even begins to border on the challenges they had to deal with. So be careful what you complain about, you know, because most of my complaints are just about something not going my way, and it's not going to do me in, and it's not even going to hurt me much, just hurt my ego or make me mad because I had plans that I have to reorganize or something. I don't get to complain about that stuff. And they're saying, get up, shut up, go to work, you know, so, and it's great. It's great to, I mean, it's really sunk in for me, and it keeps me on the path in a good way.
Yeah. I often think about, you know, sometimes when I'm saying I'm tired because I'm sitting in front of a computer in a chair all day, you know, but my grandmother, both of them worked as domestics, and my mother, you know, was a nurse's aide, but she worked all the time on her feet, you know, and because none of them got to go to college. And so how dare I, they all worked to make sure that I got to go to college. So how dare I really, you know, complain about being so tired when I don't know tired, right? You know,
That's right.
um,
Or Mr. McCarty had serious arthritis, and I have rheumatoid arthritis, so I cannot imagine doing labor, hard labor, washing clothes on a rub board with arthritis. I mean, it's difficult for me to do some smaller tasks than that. So, you know, I have this wonderful life. I mean, I have, everything's easy. There is nothing to compare to them, nothing at all, except the systems are the same. But I've got so many more tools to fight the system than they had. So, you know, Harriet Tubman had to try to sell stuff to the soldiers so she could buy food to eat, because the Union Army wouldn't feed her, even though she was working as a spy for them. I mean, how can you, you know, really? I don't have to worry about where I'm going to get food from, you know, and never, that thought doesn't have to cross my mind ever. So it's just all I have to do is remind myself about all that. And then I can get over my wanting to gnash my teeth pretty quickly.
Okay, another question here. Can you speak a little about today's women under 40? Who is inspiring you from among this group today?
Well, I think the first group right off the top of my head, without having to think but a half a second, are those three young women that started Black Lives Matter. They are the new civil rights. They gave birth to the 21st century civil rights movement, and we're too slow to give them credit for that, but that's what they've done. And so I'm very, very proud of them. And of course, I'm very proud of our vice president now. If I'd have to be out of my mind not to be proud of her, you know, but they're also I have some young women that work on my staff that I'm a kind of a mentor boss with them, and they're smart and they are passionate, and they have a great sense about liberation and justice. And I am proud about that. I think we need to listen to the voices of these young people between 17 and 39 more than we do, because they've got so much to say, and they've got so much energy and creativity and possibilities. And no, they don't see stuff the way we do, because I'm 75. So why should a 40-year-old be thinking the way I do? I didn't think that way when I was 40, like a 75-year-old. So the good news is that we can put our brains together, and God only knows what we might come up with, you know? And so I feel like that we've got to do some good work in building intergenerational connections, so that we can benefit from the wisdom. Hopefully old folks who've lived a long time will have some wisdom and not just be old. And the younger people who have the wisdom you can get for however many years you've lived, but have imagination and creativity and courage that can outdistance ours sometimes. So I'm just thrilled about engaging any young person anytime, but those ones that I just mentioned just pop up right off the bat for me.
Could you speak more about the connections between spirituality, religion, and racial justice, and about your current work at the Center for Racial Healing?
Oh, good gracious! You want me to do that? It's 20 after 7. I'll say a little bit. I would invite you to visit our website, the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing. If you just type in Center for Racial Healing, you can get to the website. Please subscribe to our newsletter. That would help you to get a little ongoing information if you have that level of interest. I think that the faith community needs to get itself together and stand up taller to deal with race in this country. And when you talk about courage, when I talk about courage, I'm especially struck by the necessity for those of us who claim to have faith to recover some courage. I wrote a piece on Facebook called "Get from Under the Bed," because you can't hide out. If you have faith, you don't get to hide out. If you have faith, you need to be trying to see, what is my faith calling me to do now? What does God want from me right now? I mean, I feel like this whole year of COVID and racial unrest and climate, the angry climate. I mean, don't you have a sense that the climate's just angry? I mean, there's just a rage out there in the storms and the snow. Everything is, I mean, we messed up everything with the environment anyway. But it felt to me at one time when there were storms, and then there were floods, and there were fires. And I thought, my goodness, how much more information do we need before we understand how mad the earth is at us? We walk around here mad at each other, but the earth is mad at us too, because we're here just being so mindless. So I think that we have been offered the invitation to turn a corner, to look at ourselves and say, do we really want a planet and want to live here? Or are we just going to see if we can kill us all off and we can go be one of those dead planets out there somewhere that we keep trying to say exists? So you have to email me and we can have a longer conversation. But the last thing I have to say about this is that if you call yourself a person of faith, you don't get to negotiate whether you're going to be standing up for what's right and if you make that decision, you will be choosing, as Dr. King said, to have somebody make a belated announcement about your death because the death has occurred. And when you die, they say you died, but you died when you said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to take a chance. I'm not going to live this way. We got to say yes to turning a corner. We've got to decide what kind of place we want to live in. And I think that every day since March of 2020, we have been being given an invitation and an opportunity to rethink where we are and who do we want to be. And I'm just really hoping that we'll say yes to the invitation to do the interrogating work, and that we will look to God to give us the courage to actually go do what we need to do. And each of us in our own way. Nobody has to do what somebody else has to do. You just got to do your own stuff. You got to do what you're called to do in the best way you can find to do it. So that's a pretty short answer. The Center for Racial Healing is 3 years old, and we welcome inquiries, emails, and I'm willing to engage in longer conversations with anybody who's interested in having a longer conversation about our work or how you might engage with us going forward.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
What role does creativity and imagination play in your historical storytelling? In other words, when is it necessary or beneficial to invite imagination into historical research, especially when dealing with subjects that have been silenced and neglected?
I'm not quite sure I understand that question. I don't, because I think if you're dealing with research, you got to just tell what you see. You don't get to be creative or imaginative. You just tell the story. But I think if you are using, for instance, as Toni Morrison used a story in Beloved, use a historical story, the novel Beloved. And she said sometimes, the reality is actually stranger than fiction, because the story is true. The woman the slave who actually killed her child is true. And then it got enlarged with her writing about it. So I guess if you use a piece of history that way to enlarge it or tell a story, then that's okay if you are true to the story and honestly deal with it. But if you're just doing straight up research, a lot of what's going on right now in our country is people want to take history and turn it into fiction because they don't like the history. And that has to not be. I mean, we cannot tolerate that. We cannot tolerate people talking about slaves as workers. Slaves were not workers. Slaves were people held in, they weren't indentured servants. They weren't people who decided to come and be slaves. They were people who got forced in to do enforced labor. And if you try to tell that story any other kind of way, you're just not telling the truth. So people who are doing that kind of thing need to be careful, because that's pretty dangerous. But if you're using a piece of history to create a greater sense of imagination in you're writing something that you clearly say is fiction informed by this story, I don't see that as being a bad thing. I think that could be a good thing, actually.
Sometimes I think that good historical fiction will whet your appetite for
Yes.
more, and you will go to learn more about that reality.
That's right. Eugenia Price was an absolute master at writing about Georgia, South Georgia, and the Sea Island, or not Sea Island, but St. Simon's Island. She was a master at writing, a mistress, I should say, at writing that, using the historical story to create the fiction she wrote. And then it made you definitely want to go read about the real people, because she just whetted your appetite so much. So, I mean, as long as you're doing it with integrity and telling the truth and saying there's a bigger story here, there's a bigger picture, then that I don't see the problem with that. What I do think we need to all be willing to do is to imagine our lives based on what's possible, rather than continuously imagining our lives on what they have been. So because I have been here, doesn't mean that I can't go way beyond here to there. And I need to be able to be open to that, rather than because I'm here, there's just so far I can go and no further. I think that we need to have a bigger imagination, be willing to engage the possibilities. We need to let go of our narratives of scarcity and be open to the abundance that's out there that could help us. And we've got to heal this land. We have got to change the narrative. We've got to change the focus. We've got to get on a better track. I mean, we just have to. We just can't keep on going down the road of gonna hate everybody and end up with all of us. So I don't know where. We're here together, and we're gonna have to figure out how to make this work better. And I'm on board for let's make it work better. I think that makes sense. So it's been so great to have this opportunity to be with everybody.
And I'm so happy I finally got, you're here sort of, and I'm so glad that you will be with us again tomorrow. So we have to wrap up for tonight, but I'm really looking forward to your workshop tomorrow afternoon. I invite all of you to come back. Thank you so much, Dr. Meeks.
Well,
so
you are so welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much too for all your good work.
Okay, everybody.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you again for being here, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. We start at 9:30, and but Dr. Meeks is in the afternoon, but please, you can check check our schedule to see the full day. Bye.
Right.
Have a great night.
Good night.